Henry Madson, a stoic 78-year-old Marine veteran, pedals 30 kilometers daily to deliver food to Bright Hope Shelter, a haven for orphaned children. His quiet sacrifice, born from a chance encounter with a struggling girl, transforms lives, especially Eli, a traumatized boy who begins to trust again. As Henry's routine becomes a local legend, a viral video sparks both admiration and skepticism. Then Henry collapses, and secrets from his heroic past unravel. Who is this mysterious cyclist? Why does the president's car arrive when he vanishes? Discover the truth behind a nation moved to tears. Inspired by Henry's selfless journey? Join us in celebrating unsung heroes. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of quiet courage that change the world. Share this tale with someone who inspires you, and let's honor kindness together. Click subscribe now to never miss a story. The rusty bicycle creaked to a halt at the iron gate of Bright Hope, its tires crunching softly against the gravel's edge. Henry Ellison, a man sculpted by time and tempered by loss, eased off the worn saddle with a quiet groan. His gnarled hands, toughened by decades of labor and scarred by battles most could never grasp, reached into the faded canvas bag slung over his shoulder. From it, he drew cartons of milk, their corners slightly crumpled from the long ride, and loaves of bread wrapped tightly to fend off the morning's damp chill. No one at the Bright Hope orphanage asked who he was. No cameras clicked to immortalize his arrival. Every day at precisely 6:00 a.m., Henry materialized from the Kansas dawn's gray mist, delivered his humble offering, and slipped away without a word. Until one morning the gate stood empty, his bicycle gone, replaced by the low hum of a sleek black car bearing the president's seal. What was it about this solitary man on a bike that moved an entire nation to tears? Henry pedaled Ellison through the pre-dawn haze, his breath forming faint clouds in the crisp air. At 78, his lean frame carried the invisible wounds of a Marine who'd walked through fire and borne memories too heavy for most hearts. His hands gripped handlebars, worn smooth by years of use, each groove a silent record of his unyielding routine. His daily odyssey began in a modest wooden house on the edge of a quiet Kansas town, where neighbors offered polite nods and knew him only as the bicycle man. Time had etched deep furrows into his weathered face, but his eyes held a fierce clarity, sharp, undimmed, burning with purpose. A small American flag, its colors softened by years of sun and rain, fluttered from the side of his olive-green backpack, a proud, if faded, echo of the man who carried it. Veterans at the local diner, nursing their own ghosts over cups of bitter coffee, saw the soldier in him still. They saw it in the precision of his movements, the way his gaze swept the horizon without seeming to shift, the ramrod straight posture that defied his years. They whispered of his past, jungles that burned in his dreams, comrades lost to gunfire he could still hear in quiet moments. Since his wife Margaret slipped away in 2001, Henry had lived alone, his home a fortress of silence. No children brought laughter to his doorstep. No family warmed his table on holidays. His kitchen calendar bore only simple X's, scratched in black ink, each one a quiet vow to outlive another sunrise, to honor the men who hadn't. Those marks weren't boasts. They were a pact, a promise to make every day matter. Bright Hope, the shelter that called to him like a lighthouse, lay 30 miles from his doorstep. Once a school, it now cradled over 40 children, orphans of wars they didn't start, of homes shattered by violence, or of lives upended by cruel chance. Government funds kept the lights flickering, but little more. Volunteers came with good hearts, but their stamina often crumbled under the children's endless needs. Hunger for food, for safety, for someone to see them. Henry's path to Bright Hope began on a rainy Tuesday at the town's supermarket. A girl, no older than 7, stood at the bread counter, her small hands trembling as she counted pennies and nickels. Her coat hung loose on her frail frame, too thin to fend off the autumn's bite. Her shoes, frayed at the toes, spoke of miles walked on borrowed time. "You all right there, little miss?" Henry's voice was low, gentle, careful not to spook her. She glanced up, her eyes wide and wary, sizing him up as threat or ally. "Where do you live?" he asked, stepping back to give her space. Wordlessly, she pointed down the road toward the shelter he'd passed countless times, but never truly noticed. That night, Henry sat at his kitchen table, a single bulb casting stark light over his pension statement. After bills, it left him $1,330 a month, enough for a sparse life, but not much else. His gaze drifted to the refrigerator, half empty save for a jar of jam and a few eggs. Then to the photograph on the wall, his Marine unit, young and fearless, frozen in a moment before the war claimed most of them. The decision came like a tide, slow but unstoppable. He rose, walked to the garage, and dragged out his old bicycle, its chain stiff with years of neglect. By dawn, he'd spent his cable TV money on milk, bread, and apples, packing them into his backpack with the care of a soldier prepping for a mission. The 30-mile ride to Bright Hope left his legs screaming and his lungs raw. But something deep within, a spark long buried, flared to life. For the first time in decades, he felt tethered to something bigger, something that made the ache in his bones feel like a badge. The road wasn't kind. One morning, a motorist leaned out a window shouting, "What's an old man like you doing out here? Trying to die?" As Henry labored up a steep hill, his bicycle wobbling under the weight, Highway Patrol stopped him twice, their flashlights probing, warning him about riding on the shoulder. "You're holding up traffic, sir," one officer said, his tone caught between concern and exasperation. When October brought slashing rains, Henry skidded on a slick road, crashing hard enough to tear his knee. He arrived at Bright Hope the next day anyway, clothes stained, a bandage hastily wrapped, but his backpack dry, the milk and bread and apples nestled safe inside. The shelter staff eyed him warily at first, their minds ticking through motives. Was he chasing a tax break? Seeking absolution for some buried sin? Or just a stubborn fool too old to know his limits? One young volunteer, Clara, a college student with a heart bigger than her paycheck, finally asked him outright, "Why do this, Henry? The county's got delivery trucks. There's got to be easier ways to help." Her voice was kind but direct, searching for the root of his quiet obsession. Henry paused, securing his now empty backpack for the long ride home. His eyes met hers, holding no trace of self-pity or fanfare. "I came back when better men didn't," he said, his voice low, like a confession carried for decades. "Those kids in there, they're fighting to live, same as I did. They deserve a shot at it, a real one." With that, he swung onto his bike and pedaled off, his silhouette shrinking against the horizon, a lone figure bound to a purpose most couldn't fathom. Good men often bear the heaviest loads, but for Henry, it was the only road he knew. In the quiet routine of Bright Hope, a shelter for children carrying the weight of fractured pasts, 12-year-old Eli stood as a solitary figure, his voice locked away behind a fortress of mistrust. The trauma that had silenced him was a heavy shadow, noted in his file with clinical precision. Resistant to interaction, particularly with male authority figures. 4 foster families had tried to reach him, each one eventually retreating, worn down by the impenetrable wall of his silence. Eli's world was one of guarded glances and unspoken pain, his heart a locked vault no one could breach. Yet, every morning an unassuming old man named Henry arrived at the shelter, his bicycle creaking under the weight of modest offerings, cartons of milk, loaves of bread, small tokens of care. Henry, with his weathered hands and quiet demeanor, carried the air of someone who had seen too yet still chose to give. For 3 months, his visits were as steady as the dawn, unnoticed by most, but slowly weaving their way into the fabric of Bright Hope. Eli, who trusted no one, began to shift. No one told him to linger by the entrance at 5:50 a.m. But there he was, day after day, his eyes fixed on the road with a quiet intensity, as if Henry's arrival tethered him to something solid in a world that felt like quicksand. By the 4th month, he stood at the gate itself, his hands clasped behind his back, unknowingly mirroring Henry's disciplined military posture. No words passed between them at first. Just a nod, a fleeting acknowledgement that spoke of shared understanding, 2 souls who knew the ache of loss without needing to name it. On a biting December morning, when frost clung to the grass and the air stung with cold, Eli broke his silence. His voice, unused for over a year, trembled as he asked, "Why don't you ever stay?" The question hung in the air, fragile and raw. Henry paused, his hands still gripping a crate of milk, and turned to study the boy's face. In Eli's eyes, there was a flicker of something. hope, perhaps, or a desperate need for answers. Henry's voice, soft but steady, carried the weight of a life lived through hardship. I spent years surrounded by gunfire, he said, his gaze distant, yet kind. Now I just need to know you're all safe. That's enough for me. The exchange was brief, less than 10 seconds, but it rippled through the staff like a shockwave. They watched, stunned, as the boy who had rebuffed every therapist's effort spoke freely to a man who asked for nothing in return. Henry, the old Marine, had slipped past barriers that professionals couldn't cross. Through the winter and into the spring, Henry's visits remained a constant, as reliable as the sun climbing over the horizon. His presence became a quiet cornerstone for the children, especially Eli, who carried the old man's nods like treasures. Then, a video changed everything. A commuter struck by the sight of Henry pedaling through a downpour, his thin jacket clinging to his frame, captured the moment on their phone. Each stroke of the pedals spoke of unshakable resolve, a quiet defiance of the storm. Posted online with the caption, "Real heroes don't wear capes," the video spread like wildfire, amassing thousands of shares and comments filled with admiration. Strangers called him a saint, a beacon of selflessness in a cynical world. But with visibility came scrutiny. A local news channel aired a segment questioning the authenticity of Henry's story. Was this elderly man's daily trek a genuine act of charity or a carefully staged performance? Online, anonymous voices grew louder, accusing Henry of chasing attention, of fabricating goodwill for some hidden gain. Some demanded proof of his veteran status, whispering of stolen valor. Others pointed to public records showing Henry owned his home outright, spinning tales that he was feigning poverty while secretly comfortable. The shelter's phone lines buzzed with skeptical callers questioning whether donations even reached the children. "He's probably got a car parked around the quarter," one commenter sneered. "No one bikes that far at his age unless cameras are rolling." The narrative twisted, painting Henry as a fraud, his quiet acts of kindness reframed as manipulation. Henry, unaware of the storm brewing online, continued his routine unchanged. He owned no computer, no smartphone, and his television had sat unplugged since the day he chose to prioritize milk for strangers over his own entertainment. The accusations never reached him, but they weighed heavily on the shelter's staff. One social worker, troubled by the growing controversy, took it upon herself to dig into Henry's past. In the dusty archives of the National War Library, she uncovered his military records. They told a story of Corporal Henry Madson, a man who, during a brutal ambush, had faced enemy fire to drag wounded Marines to safety. 7 lives were lost that day, but 12 were saved because Henry refused to stop, even as blood seeped from his own wounds. A Bronze Star recommendation praises extraordinary heroism, but Henry had declined the ceremony, choosing instead to return to his unit. One of those 12 survivors, now a national security advisor, owed his life to the man the world was now questioning. Then abruptly, Henry's visits stopped. One day, then 2, then 3. The children, used to his steady presence, grew restless, their unease mirrored in Eli's tightening jaw. Staff called hospitals, checked accident reports, but found nothing. Eli, driven by a quiet panic, slipped into the storage shed, took a bicycle, and pedaled toward town. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination, a need to know that the man who had become his anchor was still there. Near the highway overpass, he found Henry, unconscious, his bicycle crumpled beside him, his body feverish and frail from an illness that had finally overtaken his stubborn resolve. Henry Madson lay in the sterile embrace of the county hospital, his body a weathered map of a life spent in silent service. Pneumonia had sunk its claws into him, joined by dehydration and a bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of years given to others without a thought for himself. His chart, clipped to the bed, listed no family under emergency contacts, just a blank space where connection might have been. The room was dim, the only sound the rhythmic drip of his IV and the faint hum of the world beyond his window, where seasons shifted and a nation marched forward, often blind to the quiet souls who propped it up. A night nurse, her hands gentle but practiced, adjusted the IV line and leaned closer. "Is there anyone we should call for you, Mr. Madson?" she asked, her voice soft against the sterile quiet. Henry's eyes fluttered open, twin sparks of life in a face carved by time. A faint smile tugged at his lips, fragile but warm. "Why don't you call the president?" he murmured, his voice a rasp of humor and something deeper, something wistful. The nurse smiled back, her heart twisting with pity. She patted his hand, assuming the words were the fevered wanderings of a tired mind, and returned to her rounds. She didn't know that Henry's whisper carried a weight heavier than delirium. 3 days drifted by, each one blurring into the next as Henry hovered between sleep and waking. Outside, the world turned, leaves fell, winds shifted, and a country churned through its endless cycles of progress and forgetfulness. Henry's thoughts, when they surfaced, were not of himself but of the children at Bright Hope Shelter. He saw their faces, Eli's cautious grin, the younger one's wide-eyed trust, and his chest ached with a fierce, unspoken vow. Just make sure the kids have breakfast. Nothing else matters. Those words, caught by a volunteer nurse's phone, had been his last before collapsing at the shelter, his body finally betraying the will that had carried him so far. On the morning of the fourth day, at precisely 6:13 a.m., a black SUV rolled into the hospital's restricted parking lot, its lack of license plates a quiet declaration of authority. Security guards, alert and ready to challenge, froze when the driver flashed credentials that carried the weight of a nation. From the vehicle stepped a man in a tailored suit, his presence as sharp as the leather portfolio he carried, embossed with a government seal that gleamed under the dawn light. The hospital administrator was summoned before the man's polished shoes crossed the threshold. Whispers rippled through the nursing stations like wildfire. Who is he? What's happening? Within minutes, Henry's room was quietly relocated to a private wing, his care handed to specialists who materialized without explanation, their expertise as precise as it was mysterious. The man, now identified as William Harrington, National Security Advisor, stood at Henry's bedside. In his hands was a simple wooden box, its contents a bronze star medal and a letter written on presidential stationery. The note was brief but heavy with meaning. "Sir, it's 50 years late, but we never forgot." When Henry's eyes opened, bleary but sharp, Harrington stood at attention, his posture rigid with respect. "Corporal Madson," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "My name is William Harrington. In 1971, outside Dang, you pulled me and 11 others from a burning transport under heavy fire. I've spent decades trying to find you." Henry's gaze clouded with confusion, then cleared as memory stirred. "You were just a kid," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as if the weight of those years pressed against his lungs. Harrington nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I was 19, and you told me something I've carried in my entire career. The measure of a country isn't how it treats its strongest citizens. It's how it remembers its quietest ones." The words hung in the air, a bridge across decades, linking a war-torn past to this quiet hospital room. Henry's chest rose and fell, each breath a labor, but his eyes held a flicker of pride, tempered by the humility that had defined him. 24 hours later, the nation paused as the president addressed the country. Standing before the White House, he spoke without notes, his voice raw with conviction. "America is not held together by grand speeches or towering monuments," he began, his words cutting through the evening air. "It's bound by the quiet courage of people like Henry Madson, men and women who serve without seeking praise, who sacrifice without expecting reward." He told the nation of Henry's heroism in Vietnam, of a Marine who risked everything to save lives under fire. Then he spoke of Henry's recent days, his tireless treks to Bright Hope Shelter, where he ensured children had food, warmth, and a fleeting sense of safety. The president's voice softened as he announced the Madson Initiative, a program to ensure no child welfare facility would ever lack essential supplies. "True patriots don't chase applause," he said. "They chase solutions." He closed by declaring a new National Volunteer Honor Day, to be observed each year on the date of Henry's hospital admission, a day to remember those who give without asking to be seen. At Bright Hope Shelter, something beautiful unfolded. The children, learning of Henry's condition through hushed conversations among the staff, poured their hearts into handmade cards. Teenagers, often hardened by life's cruelties, took charge, organizing the younger ones into lines of quiet industry. Crayons scratched, markers squeaked, and small hands folded paper with care, each card a testament to a man who had been invisible yet indispensable. Even the newest arrivals, children still navigating the shelter's unfamiliar walls, joined in, sensing that this quiet man had touched their lives in ways they couldn't fully grasp. Eli, a boy whose guarded eyes had softened under Henry's gentle presence, worked alone. He sat hunched over a sheet of paper, his pencil moving with painstaking care. He wrote, erased, and wrote again, his fingers cramping as he poured his thoughts into words. When he finished, he folded the note with military precision, mimicking the way Henry folded his empty food bags, a small, deliberate act of respect. In his heart, Eli carried the weight of Henry's kindness. The mornings when Henry slipped him an extra slice of toast, the quiet nod that said, "You're seen, kid." Eli's note was more than words. It was a promise to carry forward the light Henry had kindled in him. A week after his collapse, Henry was discharged. A government vehicle idled outside, its engine a low hum against the hospital's sterile quiet. As he stepped into the sunlight, his body frail but his spirit unbroken, Henry carried the wooden box and Eli's folded note. He didn't know what the future held, but in his heart he felt the warmth of a nation that had finally remembered him, and the children who had never forgotten. Henry Madson's ride home was meant to be unremarkable, a quiet end to another day of selfless giving. But as he neared Bright Hope Shelter, the sight that greeted him stole his voice and halted his thoughts. 43 children and staff members stood in perfect rows, each holding a milk carton aloft like a beacon of gratitude. For a man who had faced gunfire without blinking and lived half a century in obscurity without complaint, this moment shattered his defenses, reaching deep into a heart he'd long kept locked. Eli, a boy whose quiet resolve seemed to hold the shelter's spirit together, stepped forward. His face carried a weight far heavier than his years, as if he knew the magnitude of his action. In his hands was a note, folded with care, every edge a testament to the thought behind it. He offered it to Henry, his gaze unwavering. Henry's rough hands, weathered by time and toil, shook as he opened it. The words, penned in Eli's meticulous script, hit him like a thunderbolt. "I don't need a father. I need you to come back." Henry, the stoic Marine who had endured wars in anonymity, crumbled. Tears streamed down his face as he dropped to his knees, pulling Eli into a fierce embrace. The boy clung to him, as if to tether Henry to a world that had too often passed him by. News cameras captured it all, not because Henry sought fame, but because a fractured nation needed to witness what sacrifice truly meant. In that moment, the world saw service in its purest form. Not grand gestures, but the relentless act of showing up. Those who had once ignored Henry stood silent, their dismissal laid bare. Justice, though slow, always arrives. 6 months later, Bright Hope hummed with both change and constancy. Henry still rode to the shelter each dawn, his commitment as sure as the morning light. His new bicycle, a gift from a veteran-owned company, balanced dignity with practicality, strong enough for a Marine's pride, light enough for aging joints. He no longer rode alone. Monday saw police officers pedaling beside him, their presence a quiet nod of respect. Wednesdays brought high school students, earning service credits, but gaining wisdom in Henry's steady example. Fridays belonged to veterans, their bikes forming a silent honor guard, no words needed. Henry's canvas bag had become a vessel of hope. Beyond milk, it carried comic books for reluctant readers, mechanical pencils for budding artists, and tattered manuals for bike repair. The shelter's storage room now doubled as a workshop, brimming with tools where Henry taught kids to mend what was broken. "Everything deserves a second chance," he'd say, his eyes glinting beneath bushy brows, imparting a lesson far beyond mechanics. Funds came and went, backlogged benefits, fleeting donations from media buzz. Henry treated them like clouds, neither banking on their arrival nor grieving their absence. The only change he cherished was the nameplate on the new dormitory, Madson Hall. At home, his bedroom held a single sacred space, a framed photo of Bright Hope's 43 children around his bike, their joy outshining any trophy. Next to it, his Bronze Star hung, accepted not for pride, but for peace. Between them, Eli's note read, "Love needs no medals, only wheels strong enough to carry it." Eli spent weekends with Henry, their bonds sealed through mentorship, not bureaucracy. They tended a garden, fixed neighbors' bikes, and shared quiet evenings under the patter of rain. At the shelter's year-end ceremony, Eli's essay rang clear. Mr. Madson isn't a superhero. He can't fly or shoot lasers. He's just the one who showed up every day with milk and a smile that asked for nothing. Heroes don't always save the world in one loud moment. Sometimes they do it one bike ride at a time. When pressed about his newfound fame, Henry shrugged. Attention fades, children don't. I'll take the milk run over headlines. On his 80th birthday, thousands of cards arrived from across the nation. He read each one, then donated them, insisting they belonged to the community. His legacy wasn't in the spotlight. It was in the lives he pedaled toward, one morning at a time. At the shelter, a group of children poured their hearts into an art project that transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary. They took scraps of paper, bits and pieces that might have been overlooked, and crafted them into a towering paper bicycle, a vibrant monument suspended in the entrance hall. To them, it wasn't just art. It was a declaration, a symbol of movement and purpose. The bicycle gleamed with the raw, unfiltered hope of young minds, its makeshift spokes and handlebars radiating a quiet defiance against the world's harsh edges. It stood there as a testament, whispering to anyone who passed by, the journey itself holds more weight than any fleeting adornment. Each child who contributed to the project carried their own story, their own weight. There was Sarah, with her quick fingers and guarded eyes, who folded paper with a precision that belied the chaos of her young life. She didn't speak much, but her hands moved with purpose, as if each crease she made was a small act of reclaiming control. She thought of her older brother who used to ride her on the handlebars of his rickety bike, laughing as they sped down the street, the wind carrying away their worries for a moment. That memory fueled her, and as she added her piece to the sculpture, she felt a flicker of pride. Maybe, just maybe, she was building something that could carry her forward too. Then there was Jamal, who always lingered at the edges of the group, his heart a tangle of anger and longing. He didn't trust easily, not after years of broken promises and empty cupboards. But as he glued strips of paper together, he thought of the shelter volunteer who'd taught him how to ride a bike last summer. That volunteer, with his easy smile and endless patience, never gave up on him, even when Jamal fell again and again. To Jamal, the paper bicycle wasn't just a project. It was a reminder that someone had seen him, really seen him, and believed he could keep going. As he pressed his piece into the sculpture, he felt a quiet resolve. He'd keep pedaling too, no matter how rough the road. The bicycle they built wasn't just a decoration. It was a beacon. It reminded everyone who saw it that heroism doesn't always come with fanfare. Not all heroes speed through the streets in sleek cars or stand tall in capes that billow in the wind. Some heroes are quieter, their courage woven into the steady rhythm of pedals turning, of hearts big enough to carry not just their own dreams but the hopes of others. The children's creation spoke of resilience, of finding beauty in motion, of choosing to move forward even when the destination wasn't clear. For me, this story stirs something deep, a memory that aches with both loss and love. It brings me back to my father, a man who rode his bicycle to work every day for 30 years. Rain or shine, through biting winters and sweltering summers, he pedaled on, his old bike creaking under the weight of his quiet determination. There were no crowds cheering him on, no medals pinned to his chest, no headlines celebrating his steadfastness. Yet to me, he was a giant. In my child's heart, he was the first hero I ever knew. And even now, years after his passing, he remains my North Star. I can still see him, his silhouette against the dawn, pedaling away with a purpose that needed no applause. His life taught me that true heroism lies in the steady, uncelebrated acts, the ones that carve a path for others, even when no one is watching. Henry Madson, the shelter's art teacher, helped me see this truth in a new light. He was the one who guided the children, his gentle encouragement coaxing their creativity into bloom. Henry didn't need a spotlight to make a difference. He just needed a reason, a belief that every child deserved a chance to create, to dream, to move forward. Through him, I realized that kindness doesn't require a stage or a grand gesture. It thrives in the small, deliberate choices. A hand extended, a moment shared, a path cleared for someone else to follow. Henry's own heart was heavy with loss. He'd once lost a daughter, and the pain lingered in the lines of his face. But he poured that grief into love, into showing the children that they too could build something beautiful from broken pieces. The paper bicycle in the shelter's hall stands as a quiet challenge, a call to notice the unsung heroes among us. It asks us to look closer, to see the people who keep moving forward, one determined step or pedal stroke at a time. Their courage might not make headlines, but it reshapes the world in ways that ripple far beyond what we can see. If this story stirs something in you, let it linger. Think of someone in your life who embodies that quiet strength, someone who's changing the world without ever seeking the spotlight. Share this story with them, not because they need the recognition, but because they deserve to know their journey matters. They're out there pedaling through life, carrying the future with every turn of the wheel. We've told their story, but you give it meaning. Thank you for listening, for seeing, for carrying it forward.